lifelong punishment for being born an empath. The storm of my anxiety. The inescapable prison of a vivid imagination. Foresight. Some special, higher-powered, anointed imbuement or bestowment. Is mine an origin story for a really boring superhero? Deja vu, dude. He sees the future, but just the most inane and unimportant moments. Hardly remarkable man. He can speak big words in a single sentence. Am I special? Or am I just overthinking everything? Mental health. If you can't beat it, make a podcast for it. As I've grown and matured, or tried to, I've begun deconstructing or overthinking everything in my life. I've come to some really difficult conclusions about who I am, what I am, where I come from, my people, and the things those people whom I really trusted told me to believe. Deconstruction, it's this trend where we sort of break down the barriers of bias, those things we think we know. We sort of unwind that indoctrination and we start pulling at the proverbial strings on our sweaters. And what unravels is this vulnerable, exposed, and painful yet joyously releasing catharsis. And make no mistake, this hurts. It's hard, and it's unpleasant. And the whiter you are, the more you look like me, the more painful a lot of this is to accept. Or maybe not. Bear in mind, whether you follow me on TikTok, YouTube, or any other social media, you're just a fan of my content, you have to understand that many of the things that I say, they hurt even me. My criticisms of others aren't spoken lightly. My warnings aren't conversational set dressing. I honestly despise a lot of what I have to say and despise more that I have to say it. I want more than anything for some of the things I say not to be true. Except, my life's journeys and firsthand experiences tell a much more revealing, darker, and what we know now since at least 2015, a more realistic tale of America and Americans. Without being mean, we now know the true ideals that reside in our friends, family, coworkers, and community. Now, this is going to come up a lot. My journey is one of half-truths, lies, misrepresentation, indoctrination, and an insistence to blind loyalty or faith, whether at work, church, or in my personal life. Now, as I dig deep and ask some of these hard questions and come to the harsh realizations, I've come to some alarming, if not altogether shocking conclusions about myself, about society, about them, about us, about each and every single one of us. This is Overthinking Everything, deconstructing a culture of cultism. This podcast really started out of frustration as a form of personal and political expression. I was frustrated in life, transitioning from my transition career into whatever the hell this is. I was frustrated socially and politically, living as an educated, open-minded, free-thinking individual in an uneducated, closed-minded, simple-thinking red state. I was frustrated politically because so much misinformation, so many lies, and so much ignorance was mucking up the waters. Remaining silent, or at least vocal in my insulated, privileged bubble, was no longer the shield from public personal accountability for my opinions, but a prison of complacence and complicity. A former broadcaster, I wanted a platform that would showcase my meanness in a way I'd never been at liberty to do before, sort of shackled to someone else's brand. But before the COVID-19 pandemic came about, I decided to start my podcast, ready or not, so I did. I wasn't ready. I had to overcome a lot of creator growth struggles, which I'll talk about down the road and elsewhere. Now, those struggles are over, so I'm redoing a lot of my podcast in this new video series that covers everything. Literally any and everything is up for overthinking. As we look at the first season, if you will, deconstructing a culture of cultism, I'm going to dispel the myths and mistruths we've all been told about key points in our history. I'm going to shed some light in the dark corners of ourselves and reveal the things maybe we aren't comfortable confronting yet. We're going to have to, much sooner than later. So this series really is for anyone trying to make sense out of their journey, out of cultism, wherever you may be in that journey. While many of these stories might be my stories and experiences, I hope you don't relate to them. Something tells me you will, though. This is about our culture, not just white culture, but American culture, and how we've sort of been subjugated to one form of cultism or another. In fact, in our society, it's difficult to exist not practicing some form of cultism. But get this right, I will be talking a lot about white culture. In fact, the conclusion of this series, the season finale, if you will be titled White Noise. This isn't going to be comfortable. So let's start with the big questions. What is cultism? Now, I'm a big fan of definitions, as you're going to come to find out. I'm not a big fan of using the word to define the word, even if the word you're using to define the word is the root word of the word you're trying to define. But let's just look at it still, shall we? Devotion to a cult. See? Does us no good. Apropos for most isms, and itties for that matter. So, what's a cult? Dictionary.com gives us 4 definitions. First, a particular system of religious worship, especially with reference to its rites and ceremonies. Second, an instance of great veneration of a person, ideal, or thing, especially as manifested by a body of admirers. Third, the object of such devotion. And finally, a group or sect bound together by veneration of the same person, thing, or ideal, etc. Yes, this is considered middle school level vocabulary. Still, looking at these definitions, it's no wonder people struggle with concepts, especially if they have any sort of learning hindrance, as we're finding out today so many people have. Let's simplify. A system of religious worship, which means worship on a fairly significant widespread scale, with rites, ceremonies, pomp and circumstances, communion offering, baptism, and whatnot. Now, the second definition really opens it up to an idea of worshiping a person, idea, or thing outside of religion. After all, what do we worship? I'll get into that later. The cult could be, by third definition, the object of such devotion. For instance, in Indiana Jones and the Temple of Doom, the Sankara stones might fall into this category, right? Here are all these people fighting and killing over these 5 smooth rocks. Sacred, sure, but what the hell does that even mean? I'll get to that later, too. Now, it's the fourth definition that ties it all together for us. A group of people connected by the adoration or worship of this person, thing, or idea. So, the cult can be the larger system of worship of a person, thing, or idea, the very person, thing, or idea that system is built on, and the collective group of people who worship that person, thing, or idea. The church, the deity, and the followers. An unholy trinity of cultism. See, too often we look at a cult as cults, as if they're solely religious. And generally speaking, we discuss cults as if they're some nonsensical, out there extremist sect of one of our more accepted religions, rather than looking at the entire system of religion as the cult. Look, follow me. You'll hear many atheists taunt, every religion is a cult. As annoying as that may be, by definition, they're right. failure to admit that to oneself teeters on a mental illness I'll touch on a lot in this series. Self-awareness is what separates the person with narcissistic behavior from the narcissist. And a self-aware narcissist? That's called a sociopath. Strong words? Well, maybe by the end of this series you'll either agree with me or you'll better understand how I came to my conclusions. I think of cultism as sort of an almost blind allegiance to a noun or idea that is irrational, given the comparative relative priority placed on that noun or idea in one's existence. Let me explain. Liking a thing is perfectly fine. Really liking the thing, that's okay. But when we make our entire personalities about these people, places, things, ideas, etc., we're catapulting ourselves into cultism, even more dangerous if we're oblivious to it. You can think of cults like the pens the sheep get herded into, or we herd ourselves into. From an early age, we are Coke or Pepsi, Chevy or Ford, hell, import or domestic, beer too for that matter. You ever talk whiskey with a redneck? Believe you me, there is a cultism there. With all due respect, Tennessee and Kentucky folk, we know our whiskey. I don't, of course, because I'm not an alcoholic. But since we're on that subject, systematic worship. Couldn't we argue that our culture certainly does sort of worship alcohol? We praise it, we glorify it, we mutter under our breaths how dangerous it can be, but by the end of it, we're on our fourth shot debating if we should drive home or get an Uber. I mean, I don't, because I'm not an alcoholic. Now that sounds judgy. It is. Look at alcohol and our nation's struggles with sobriety. Some conservatives recognized in the early 20th century the ills of alcohol and tried to ban it. Well, for more reasons than that, but it worked as well as having pot illegal. So my body, my choice, and if I want to pickle my liver, no regulation. We know the risks, we know the outcomes, we still worship alcohol. Have a bad day? Oh God, I need a drink. It's 5 o'clock somewhere. It's beer 30. Do we pray before we consume alcohol like we do before we eat a meal? Bless this Harvey Wallbanger to the nourishment of our bodies. Think of the people you know who have alcohol-branded merchandise or even just a liquor cabinet. Now, isn't that a shrine to the god of alcohol? Certainly an altar to alcoholism. But Josh, you're getting carried away here. Just because I drink doesn't mean I'm an alcoholic. And what does that have to do with cultism anyway? Well, alcohol in this country is cultism. We have our brands, we have our favorite drinks, we watch TV sometimes just to see their commercials. We want to be the most interesting person in the world. We want to squeeze that lime into our Corona at the beach. Crap, I just gave Republicans a new COVID cure conspiracy theory. It doesn't work. Lime won't cure COVID. Look at how we regard alcohol. Trust me, as someone who doesn't drink, I see the reactions in social settings. Now, don't get me wrong. I love a good Bloody Mary. I just don't like alcohol enough to drink Bloody Marys regularly. I end up slapping my head and thinking, I could have had a V8. But that's why I don't drink. Beer is horse piss, whiskey is antiseptic, vodka, that's rubbing alcohol, and tequila is always a bad idea. Now, I come from alcohol abuse in my family, if not addiction. I drank too much a few times when I was younger, but my relationship with alcohol was never more than recreational and social. This has given me an interesting perspective on the topic. I'm not addicted, never had a real problem with booze. I just don't prefer to consume it. And I just honestly don't like what it does to everyone else. The reactions, though, to people hearing, no thank you, I don't drink, with no further explanation, is eerily similar to deity believers hearing you're a non-believer. Alcoholics are far more respectful of boundaries, I will say. A few times, very few times, have I ever told anyone that I don't drink. a drinker, and they still push me to drink. Very few times. Now, religion can't say the same. This is a key distinction between these two groups as cults. Self-awareness. Now, the alcoholic, I argue, knows how toxic their cult is, but the religious fanatic is oblivious. But the cult is the thing or the institution that thing is built around. Now, how we treat things makes them a cult. Jim Jones himself wasn't a danger to most until people started buying his bullshit. Until people started idolizing him, Jim Jones was just some wackadoo guy with some really shitty ideas. Okay, bad example. Most doomsday cults are. Hopefully you see where I'm going. While alcoholics may be more polite, observant of personal boundaries, and much more consent-aware than religious folk, there's still a cultism to the observance of alcohol as recreational, celebrational, or ceremonial inclusion. Hey, want to go out for drinks? Isn't, hey, want to go spend time together relating and communicating? Where's our focus? It isn't on the individual, on the relationship, on the connection. It's to the connection to the substance. Maybe you're not an addict. Maybe you're not even compulsive. Maybe you're mentally healthy. Maybe you lucked out and can consume alcohol with zero negative effects. I promise you, we are in the minority. I assure you. Am I anti-alcohol? I'm anti a lot of things. Alcohol serves few purposes, most of them indulgent in ways most spiritualities warn against if one is trying to achieve oneness. When we discuss the scales of balance, I believe alcohol's influence in our society, all things considered, tips to the negative, like many of our culture's cult-like obsessions do. And like many of our culture's cult-like obsessions, not being aware of how close the reverence for the person, thing, idea, etc. is teetering toward cultism, that makes for a pot that's just waiting to boil over. That awareness is accountability. Think of a teenager who's pushing their boundaries. They act oblivious to the rules because if they acknowledged that what they were doing was wrong, then they would have to admit that they're doing the thing they know is wrong even after they've realized the thing was wrong. But the thing is fun, so they don't want to stop doing the thing just yet, so they keep fooling themselves. But as we know, they aren't fooling anyone else for very long. Self-awareness, mindfulness, accountability, and personal responsibility. That's where we should all try and strive toward. Now, this series certainly is about everything, but that's really where we're going to fall at. In your life, you can pick and choose your preferences, form biases, even in some cases, maybe even a prejudice. You can even like someone, something, or an idea so much to the point of bordering on cultism. But having the self-awareness to acknowledge the personal responsibility of your thoughts and actions, mindfulness of how those thoughts and actions may impact others, and the accountability to right your wrongs. I think that's a good first step to personal progress. I know. This sounds like a self-help podcast, doesn't it? It is. This is really a wolf in sheep's clothing podcast. This is a podcast I've dressed up as one thing, but once I get you comfortable, I'm going to unzip this wool sweater and whammo! Ha-ha! I'm showing my fangs of facts and hopefully helping you see some things from a different perspective. This is literally about everything. What Overthinking Everything will be a podcast that will train your brain into analyzing the aspects of things we've known and loved our entire lives, from people, places, rituals, holidays, entertainment, and more. Literally everything is on the table. And we're deconstructing it and overthinking everything. Hopefully you're better for the experience. If not, all complaints can be sent to my agent, whom I will then apologize to for having not warned them that they were going to get angry letters, since that is not at all their job. The next few episodes are going to skew somewhat historical and political. I'm hoping to set a foundation and help answer, how did we get here? And in order to understand the now, we have to understand the then. There's a lot of missing information, context, and half-truths out there in all of our perspectives. I'm trying to spackle some of those holes in your mental drywall. This is why teaching accurate, factual information, as well as offering a broad selection of information to students, is vital. When schools fight for funding, it's based off standardized testing, right? Those scores and performances matter to getting the funding. Writing, math, and science, those are the primary focus of most of these standardized tests in most states. Now, while those skills are fundamental, what we've discovered over the generations is that you can't play the game if you don't know the rules. Imagine a board game. You just unpack on the table. You don't bother reading the rules or hell, even reading the box. And you just roll the dice and figure it out as you go along. Or, you have your buddy who's never played the game either explain it to you because, he saw it online. Our populace has been deprived of a quality education in the social studies for decades, if not always. A majority of voters don't know the rules of the game because they weren't taught them in high school. We've pushed social studies to the low priority for too long. Social studies, it's far too often glossed over in primary and secondary schools, with many of the classes being considered electives. So, what are the social studies? History, government, civics, economics, geography, and of course, sociology for sure. That's easy, right? But also psychology, ethics, philosophy, anthropology, art, literature, and so much more goes into it. In fact, I'll bet most of you listening went, when I got to econ and geography, because I'm sure you knew it, but you just don't mention them all that much in reference to social studies. It's history, government, and civics. No commas. But most places don't even offer civics. They lump it in with government. But then sociology, of course. Social studies is sociology. My undergrad minor, by the way. Look, consider all of that information as a buffet for your brain. Copyright pending. That smorgasbord of spiritual sustenance is spread out before us on this beautiful buffet of bountiful self-betterment. The more we all know about all of these subjects, the better we all are. And how can you truly understand a person, a people, if you don't understand their history, geography, philosophy, ethics? If we can grasp an understanding of the social studies aspects of a person or a group, we can better understand them as individuals. I want you to think of someone in your life who is just unable to progress, unable to move forward. Maybe it's a coworker or a family member, someone whose ideas and attitudes reflect a less evolved social mindset. Someone who might look at another group or race or gender as lesser than. And we've all known someone like that at some point, haven't we? Do you believe those people have a rich, expansive understanding of philosophy, ethics? Look, how about just calling it what it is, calling it out? How many bigots do you know that truly appreciate an understanding of psychology of what it is to be a person of color in America or to be a part of the LGBTQ community? Do you believe that most of these racists, these bigots that we know, that you know, if they were sat down and somehow humanely forced to empathize, do you believe they'd soften up? Maybe. Probably. I need to believe that. I need to believe that this is a systematic neglect of a people and deliberate manipulation of our electorate for the sole purpose of sowing dissolution and division amongst we, the people, and that, in fact, we are not a hateful, bigoted, closed-minded society, but instead a loving, compassionate, welcoming, and open-minded, open-hearted society who has been led astray by corrupt people with their own selfish agendas. I'd like to think we adhered to the philosophy more of Jesus Christ than that of Rambo. I'd like to think that greedy corporate bastards made education for profit so that only the privileged people could be smart and learn critical thinking skills, thus dividing us into a labor consumer class and the ruling elite privileged class. I have to believe this because the alternative to that is that people are just horrible and don't care and just want to be stupid. For me, that's an unbearable possibility. In this podcast, you'll hear a lot about the dumbing down and numbing down of our society. What I mean, and will further explain as we go, is that over generations, our society has been dumbed down by entertainment that panders to the lowest hanging intellectual fruit, easy humor, or those dirty jokes that tickle the inner adolescent but require no higher reasoning. We've dumbed down ourselves with sugar and chemicals and shortening our attention spans to these 7-second clips. Are you even still with me? It's been over 20 minutes. The numbing down goes to those jokes, those punchlines, those headlines, the constant barrage of news infotainment. We get opinions from everywhere. Someone asked me a while back, and I thought about what they said. They asked me if I thought as a people we were more opinionated than in generations past. I really did. I contemplated. Are we? Or are we all more aware of everyone's opinion? Or do we just have access to more opinions to steal, borrow, or agree with than ever before? Is it hard to imagine sitting on a porch arguing about politics in the early 20th century? What about the mid-1800s? 1700s? Actually, we've probably always been this contentious. Through the almost Clockwork Orange-esque forced consumption of mass media from our phones, computers, the music playing in the background at one of those Poverty Palace dollard markets, and then the constant influx of attitudes and opinions of others combined it makes us have to shut down some of our feels. It's overload. Well, then you factor in rude comedy. Too soon? That insensitive joke or punchline, the self-deprecation, the belittling of others, body shaming, judging, entertainment. Trying to be funny, trying to be edgy, whatever we want to call it. South Park, for all its witty social commentary, features a horrible character who uses anti-Semitic slurs against a Jewish friend. This phrase is almost a catchphrase. It's said so much on this show. In fact, myself included, I've heard countless people repeat that slur in the safety of their own little bubble. Why?
Because making the voice of the little bigot bastard kid is easy.
Well, for most people. I'm a voice actor. I do voices for a living. But I've seen so many people do that character's voice because it's easy and it's fun to do. And you know, I've mimicked voices. I get it. I've mimicked all voices, even Boondocks. Every group you can imagine, mock, probably too. I'm sure at some point or another. I know what I'm talking about here. I've dug out of that. Stepping out of that culture gives one a different perspective. And what do we do when we dumb ourselves down? Or we're dumbed down by the system that be? Is we lack critical thinking skills, that higher order reasoning, that objectivity through pragmatics and research methods. We become gullible and fall prey to our base instincts: survival, fear, protection of self and tribe. These are traits that are generational PTSD that is passed down through DNA. That sounds like some sort of messed up science fiction, not science, right? I'll ask you to research how trauma can be passed down genetically. It is fascinating stuff. Not to excuse anyone's horrible behavior. However, if we can hope to explain it, we can better understand it, better hope to prevent it. and the horrible person too, if they are indeed a horrible person, or just a person behaving horribly because it's all they know. The dumbing down and numbing down of our society. We can't think no good, and we stop feeling the compassion, the empathy. We detach ourselves selectively from our humanity. Now, there are psychological terms I've brought up before that are aligned with these traits. It's that accountability, self-awareness, mindfulness, personal responsibility that helps keep us from being one of those aforementioned psychological terms. Another phrase you're going to hear me discuss in this series is toxic white Southern culture. My hypothesis is that much of what we know of MAGA America, which is concentrated heavily in the uneducated rural parts of the country, is rooted in Southern culture primarily. In that, at the very foundation of this cult we're witnessing are some base-level cultural, geographic, historical, sociological, economic, psychological, ethical, religious, philosophical, and even anthropological similarities with the earliest settlers in the southeastern United States, also known as Appalachia. And that's how you say it. This isn't a condemnation of my people. Look, I'm no J.D. Vance. This isn't my hillbilly elegy. I want our people to advance. This, if anything, is my hillbilly eulogy. What I've witnessed firsthand of my culture, toxic white Southern culture, is widespread throughout the continental United States and even into Canada, Alaska. It's not just America. It's Caucasian colonialism and European, specifically British and French, imperialism. The roots of the most toxic of our culture's traits stem from trauma inflicted on the lower class British, Irish, Scottish, and African people by, well, England and the church. And we could go all the way back to the Romans and before, but that's another episode. A lot of those persecuted peoples had to flee for their lives. Many of them settled in the New World, America. Where did they settle? In places that looked a lot like home. From the Scottish Highlands to the rolling mountains of Appalachia. Perfect transition, don't you think? They did. But what these people brought with them were superstitions, suspicions, fears, bigotries, biases, and prejudices, trauma. That trauma didn't just 1, 2, 3, poof, magic go away. Those traumas were taught to their children, and those ideals passed down generations. In fact, many of our worst and most toxic ideals in America's toxic white Southern culture regarding race, they stem from the ideas of those Europeans resentful in the increasing number of African slaves in their countries and communities in the late 16th through 19th centuries. Hundreds of years of those attitudes. In fact, in the 1590s in Europe, England specifically, economic suffering was pretty widespread. Now, what do primitive people do when they're starving? They turn against each other and shift blame to the scapegoat. Now, those scapegoats work a lot easier when they don't look like most folk. Being different, specifically in appearance, than the majority makes it easier to point them out and hate them for something they have nothing to do with, rather than focusing your bitterness up the royal and governmental food chains. Long story short, as is the philosophy for America's social studies education system, times were tough. Harvests weren't yielding. Starvation, poverty, homelessness, there were beggars everywhere. It seemed like the income gap between the privileged and the lower working class was chasmic. There were shortages on many things the Queen's people needed to live their daily lives. Speaking of those things, one of the many things the privileged people in Britain needed at the time was help. Servants. Black African servants, or in some cases, entertainment. But go back to the mid-1500s. England didn't start the slave trade. Slavery had been going on since the dawn of man. From the beginnings, there were the rulers and the servants. You think they paid the servants a living wage? This is part of human history, not just white history. Hell, it may be human nature. It's hard to argue.
In 1492, Columbus sailed the ocean blue,
looking for slaves. Spices, resources, path to Asia, yes, but slaves, certainly. His writings at the time noted what good slaves the indigenous peoples to the not America islands he mistakenly and ineptly landed on would be. Plus, while evidence of forced or indentured servitude exists in Caucasian culture pretty far back, when we discuss the African slave trade, the transatlantic slave trade, that really was at the core of our nation's birth, its civil war, its fight for civil rights, and all the way to today, we look to Portugal. It was Portugal as the first European country to really open up the African slave trade routes and perfect the art of the deal, so to speak. You see, in the earliest days of what I'm discussing, Portugal found that raids on coastal African communities to bring over those African workers for the Portuguese island plantations in the Mediterranean Sea, well, those raids were costly of resources and men and quite counterproductive. Portugal found that negotiating with governments and rulers of tribes yielded much better results. They still raided and stole people from their lands, sure, but on paper, they had agreements for actual Africans to steal the people for them. Then the Dutch figured out what was going on. They wanted that free labor too, so they got in on the action. The British and the French followed suit. I know. It sounds like I'm trying to absolve white European colonizers for their slavery sins. Not even a little. Just to point out that while Portugal and the Dutch were at the beginnings of the African slave trade, Queen Elizabeth's England corporatized it. Hell, they franchised it, slapped a logo on it. Hell, they all but ran advertising for it. Well, they actually did run advertising. Not commercials like we're used to now. You know, England free labor, we import people right. With respects to Barry Manilow and the Colonel, of course. Think of the Portuguese as Richard and the Dutch as Maurice McDonald. They've got a pretty nice little burger diner going on. They've got this whole setup, that's just really taken off. It's blowing up. England is Ray Kroc. England turned that little burger diner into the biggest global distributor of burgers on the planet. And like the brothers' namesake, those wages today are pretty much modern-day slavery. Burgers in this analogy would be the slaves if you didn't get it. That's a lot to swallow for the first episode, isn't it? Cults, alcoholism, social studies, and the McHistory of slavery. All for the purpose of what? A psychological and sociological case study of rural MAGA America. Understanding the rise of the cult of evangelical nationalism and fascism in America. To understand that, while it's spread across the continent, its roots are in southern rural culture. To also accept that if we're subject and vulnerable to cultism at its most simplest forms, sodas, shoe brands, TV shows, sports teams, then we are certainly vulnerable to actual cults like religions or political personalities. It isn't a far leap from Coke or Pepsi to left or right. We choose sides constantly. It's one or the other. And that mindset eventually leads to us versus them. It's the accountability, self-awareness, mindfulness, and personal responsibility we talked about before that helps keep us in check. The more mindful we are of the cultism around us every day, it helps us avoid falling prey to it. Just like reading multiple news sources from other countries helps sway us from propaganda, being more aware of what is draining our energies helps us maintain our energies. We will discuss how to deal with people, those stressful events in your life, those folks who just don't want to be better. We'll be discussing one of my favorite subjects in this podcast, moral dilemmas. I'm really excited to get into some of these topics with you and hopefully encourage some serious thought into who and what you want to be. If you have time, hang out or subscribe and make sure you come back for the next episode, Party Crashers, where I'm going to break down a little bit of this two-party system everybody keeps telling us we have. I'm going to dispel some of the myths and some of the gaslighting we've been subjected to and explain a little better how the big switch never happened. Not the way we think anyway. I've been a proponent of explaining how America's Democrats and Republicans have sort of switched ideologies, and I'd like to correct that and set the record straight, once and for all, in Party Crashers. I want to thank you for joining me for Overthinking Everything, deconstructing a culture of cultism. I'm Josh Brandon. Follow me on TikTok, Josh Brandon VO, and Josh Brandon VO 2.0.